They say you should never burn bridges in business. What they don't tell you is that sometimes the bridge burns you first, and you're just standing there watching the smoke rise, wondering whether to jump into the water or walk through the fire. I learned that on a Wednesday morning in September, in a conference room where I was exactly 7 minutes into the most important demo of my career, when the VP of product cut me off mid-sentence and told me my services were no longer needed. Not in private, not in a dignified conversation behind closed doors, but in front of the investor panel that was deciding whether to fund our Series A, including the lead investor who used to be my business partner and knew exactly what he was watching unfold. My name is Adrian Cole, and I used to be the lead engineer at Nexus Technologies, a B2B software startup that had spent 18 months building a platform I designed from the ground up. Used to be, because that morning, 7 minutes into a demo that was supposed to prove we were worth $8 million of venture capital, I learned that competence matters less than politics, and that the person who takes credit for your work will eventually decide they don't need you around to remind them whose work it actually was. The meeting had been scheduled for 10 o'clock. Critical timing. Our Series A round was stalling, we were burning through our seed funding faster than projected, and we needed this investment to survive past Q1. The investor panel included 3 partners from different firms, all of whom had expressed preliminary interest, but wanted to see the product demonstrated by the team before making commitments. The team. That's what David Reeves had called us when he'd sent the calendar invite. The team would be presenting to investors. But everyone knew the real dynamic. David was VP of Product, hired 8 months ago to professionalize our go-to-market strategy, which apparently meant taking ownership of everything I'd built and presenting it as his vision. I was the technical talent who'd actually built the platform, who understood every line of code and every architectural decision, who could answer any question about what the system did and why it mattered. We'd prepared for days. David had created slides, polished talking points, rehearsed his pitch about market opportunity and competitive positioning. I'd prepared the demo environment, created sample data that would showcase our platform's capabilities, built backup scenarios in case anything went wrong. We were supposed to be aligned, coordinated, professional. What I hadn't prepared for was being fired in front of the people whose money we desperately needed. The conference room on the 23rd floor had the kind of view that was supposed to make investors feel like they were betting on something elevated, important. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, a table that seated 12, screens mounted on the walls for presentations, everything designed to project confidence and success, to make people forget that Nexus was 17 months from launch and 6 months from insolvency. The investor panel sat on one side of the table. Karen Wu from Elevation Partners, a mid-sized fund that specialized in enterprise software. Robert Chen from Muscade Ventures, known for taking calculated risks on technical founders. And Marcus Webb from Summit Capital, my former business partner, from the company we'd built together before I'd left to join Nexus, before the partnership had dissolved in ways that were complicated and unresolved. Marcus and I hadn't spoken in 2 years. Seeing him across the table was like encountering a ghost. The person I'd known existed somewhere, but hadn't expected to face in this particular context, in this particular moment. David opened with his standard pitch: market size, customer pain points, competitive landscape. He was good at this part, confident, articulate, able to tell a story that made investors see opportunity rather than risk. I'd give him that. Then he transitioned to the demo. Let me show you what makes Nexus different. What you're about to see is a platform that solves real problems for enterprise clients in ways that our competitors simply can't match. He nodded at me. My cue to take over, to show rather than tell, to demonstrate the technology that justified the $8 million we were asking for. I pulled up the demo environment on the main screen, our platform's dashboard, clean and functional, showing the kind of data that enterprise clients would care about: workflow automation, efficiency metrics, integration status across multiple systems. What you're looking at is a live instance of our platform managing a simulated enterprise environment, I said. 300 users, 50 different workflows, integrations with 12 legacy systems. The key innovation here is the predictive automation. Our system learns from patterns in how work gets done and proactively suggests optimizations. I clicked through to a workflow example. Here's a typical approval process: Traditional systems would require manual configuration for each step. Our platform watches how approvals actually flow through the organization and adapts the routing automatically. Watch what happens when I introduce a bottleneck. I triggered a scenario where a key approver was marked as out of office. The system detected the blockage, analyzed historical patterns, and automatically rerouted the approval to a backup approver with relevant authority. The system just saved 3 days of delay by recognizing a pattern it had learned from previous similar situations. That's the kind of intelligence that traditional workflow systems can't. I think we get the idea, David said, interrupting. Let me take over from here and show how this translates to business value. I looked at him, confused. We'd rehearsed this. I was supposed to walk through 3 more scenarios, building to the technical capabilities that differentiated us from competitors. There's more to show, I said carefully. The integration layer, the security model, the scalability architecture. The investors don't need technical details, David said, his tone friendly but firm. They need to understand the business impact. Karen, Robert, Marcus, what you really care about is ROI, right? Let me show you how our clients are measuring value. He pulled up a different slide deck, one I hadn't seen before. Customer testimonials, efficiency metrics, projected cost savings. All of it based on the single pilot client we'd managed to sign, extrapolated into projections that looked impressive but weren't actually validated by data. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. This wasn't the presentation we'd agreed on. This was David's version, prepared separately, designed to minimize the technical content and maximize his own narrative control. Marcus leaned forward. I'd actually like to see more of the technical architecture. Adrian, you built this, right? Walk me through the integration layer. That's usually where these platforms break down. Finally, a question I could answer. The integration layer uses a... Adrian's technical contributions have been excellent, David said, cutting me off again. But for purposes of this meeting, I think it's more important to focus on the business model and growth strategy. We can schedule a separate technical deep dive if needed. I'd prefer to hear from Adrian now, Marcus said, and there was an edge to his voice. He built the system. He knows how it works. Why are we hearing from you instead of him? The tension in the room shifted. Karen and Robert glanced at each other, sensing dynamics they didn't understand. David's expression tightened. Marcus, I appreciate your interest in the technical details, David said, but as VP of Product, I'm responsible for translating technical capabilities into business value. That's my role here. Your role is to present what Adrian built. I'd like to hear from the person who actually did the building. I think we should move forward with the prepared presentation, David said. We have limited time, and I want to make sure we cover everything that matters to your investment decision. Marcus sat back, his expression unreadable. I'd seen that look before, the face he made when he was making calculations, deciding whether to push harder or let something go. Actually, Marcus said, I have some concerns about the organizational structure here. Karen, Robert, can we take a brief break? I'd like to caucus with my co-investors before we continue. They stepped out. David, myself, and our CEO, Sarah Chen, sat in the conference room, waiting. The silence was thick with unspoken tension. What the hell was that? Sarah finally said, looking at David. Why did you cut Adrian off? I was keeping us on message. The demo was getting too technical. Investors don't care about architecture. They care about returns. Marcus specifically asked about architecture, I said. He wanted to understand how the system actually works. Marcus is your former partner, right? David's tone implied something accusatory. This feels like it might be personal between you two. It's not personal, it's professional. He's an investor who understands technical platforms, and he's asking reasonable questions that I'm trying to answer. And I'm trying to manage this meeting effectively. We need to focus on the business case, not get lost in technical details that don't matter to the funding decision. Before I could respond, the investors returned. Their expressions had changed, more guarded, less engaged. Whatever they'd discussed during the break hadn't gone well. Marcus spoke first. We appreciate your time today. However, before we continue, we need to address something. David, can you explain your role in the product development process? How involved have you been in building what we just saw? I've been deeply involved in the product strategy and roadmap. My role is to ensure that technical development aligns with market needs. But you didn't write any code. You didn't design the architecture. You didn't make the core technical decisions that determine whether this platform actually works. Correct. That's Adrian's domain. I focus on product market fit and customer value. Then why are you the one presenting? Why are we hearing from you instead of the person who built this? David's composure cracked slightly. Because I'm the VP of product. It's my job to present our product to investors. No, Marcus said. It's your job to manage product development. Presenting to investors is about credibility, about showing us that you have the talent and the capabilities you're claiming. And right now, you're showing us that the person who built your platform isn't trusted to explain it. Sarah intervened. Marcus, I think there's been a misunderstanding about roles and responsibilities. There's no misunderstanding. I've watched this dynamic play out multiple times. A VP who doesn't understand the technology trying to take credit for work done by engineers who aren't given the chance to speak for themselves. It's a red flag, a significant one. Karen and Robert were nodding. I could see David processing this, realizing that his attempt to control the narrative had backfired in the worst possible way. Perhaps we should reschedule, Sarah said carefully. Give everyone time to recalibrate and come back with a clearer presentation structure. Perhaps, Marcus said. But first, I need to understand something. Adrian, are you planning to stay with Nexus through the next funding round and beyond? I looked at David, at Sarah, at the investors who were asking a question I couldn't answer honestly without torpedoing the entire meeting. I'm committed to the platform's success, I said carefully. That's not what I asked. Are you planning to stay with the company? The silence stretched. David was staring at me with an expression that mixed anger and something like fear. Sarah looked trapped between her VP and her lead engineer, unable to choose without consequences. I'm evaluating my options, I said finally. My commitment to Nexus depends on whether Nexus is committed to building the platform the right way. And is Nexus committed to that? Marcus asked David directly. Of course we are. Adrian is a valued member of the team. Then why did you cut him off 7 minutes into a demo of technology he built? Why are you answering questions he's more qualified to answer? Why does it feel like you're trying to push him out of the conversation about his own work? David's face reddened. I'm managing this meeting in the way I think is most effective for achieving our funding goals. If Adrian feels marginalized, that's not my intent, but I have to prioritize what's best for the company. What's best for the company is keeping the talent that built your product. And what you're showing us right now is that you don't understand that. Marcus stood. I'm withdrawing Summit Capital's preliminary interest in this round. The organizational dynamics I'm seeing don't give me confidence in the management team's ability to retain key talent through the growth phases we'd be funding. Karen, Robert, I encourage you to think carefully about what you just witnessed. He walked out. Karen and Robert exchanged glances, gathered their things. We'll be in touch, Karen said to Sarah. But I have to tell you, that didn't go the way you needed it to go. They left. Sarah, David, and I sat in the conference room, surrounded by the debris of a pitch that had collapsed in real time. Well, David said after a long silence, that was a disaster. Adrian, what the hell did you say to Marcus before this meeting? I haven't spoken to Marcus in 2 years. Then why did he sabotage us? Why did he turn this into a referendum on my management instead of an evaluation of our product? Because he understood what was happening. He saw you taking credit for work you didn't do and cutting off the person who actually did it. That's not sabotage. That's pattern recognition. I wasn't taking credit. I was presenting our product in a way that makes business sense. You were erasing my contribution while claiming my work as yours. There's a difference. Sarah held up her hand. Stop. Both of you? We just lost our lead investor and probably the other two as well. We need to figure out how to salvage this, not argue about who said what. There's nothing to salvage, I said. Marcus was right. The organizational dynamics here are broken. David doesn't trust me to present my own work, and I don't trust him to represent it accurately. That's not something we can fix with better presentation coordination. What are you saying? Sarah asked, though her expression suggested she already knew. I'm saying that I'm resigning from Nexus, effective immediately. I'll stay long enough to document what needs to be documented. But I'm not continuing with a company where my contributions are minimized by someone who doesn't understand them. David's expression shifted from anger to something closer to panic. You can't leave. The platform is yours. No one else here understands it well enough to maintain it, let alone develop it further. Then you probably shouldn't have cut me off mid-demo and made it clear that you don't value my input. Actions have consequences. I walked out of that conference room into a hallway that felt different than it had an hour before. The same building, the same floor. But I was seeing it through the eyes of someone who'd just been shown exactly how little his work mattered to the people who'd benefited from it. The next 2 days were a blur of exit procedures and documentation handoffs. I wrote everything I could think of: architecture decisions, code structure, deployment procedures, known issues and their workarounds. The kind of technical documentation that's always incomplete because half of what makes a system work lives in the head of the person who built it, inaccessible to anyone who just reads the manual. I documented the integration layer that Marcus had asked about, the elegant solution I'd designed to connect legacy systems without requiring massive rewrites. Explained the caching strategy that made the platform fast enough to be usable at scale. Detailed the security model that protected client data while allowing the flexibility that enterprise customers demanded. Every page I wrote felt like giving away something I'd created, handing it to people who'd demonstrated they didn't understand its value. But the alternative, leaving with nothing documented, making myself legally vulnerable to claims that I'd sabotaged them on my way out, was worse. Sarah tried to convince me to stay, offered more equity, promised changes in how product decisions would be made, suggested that David could be transitioned to a different role. All the negotiations that should have happened before rather than after a disaster. What would that look like? I asked. David in a different role? Maybe we make him head of business development. Keep him focused on customers and sales, not on product presentations or technical strategy. So, the same role, just with a different title. He'd still be between me and the market, still controlling how our work gets presented. What would you want instead? I'd want the people who build things to be trusted to explain them. I'd want technical competence to matter more than presentation skills. I'd want a company where being really good at your job doesn't make other people feel threatened. I paused. But you can't fix that with an org chart change. It's a culture issue, and culture comes from leadership. David is who he is. That's not going to change. It's not about David, I told her finally. It's about what that meeting revealed. You needed me to build the platform, but you don't trust me to represent it. That's not a company I want to be part of. Marcus destroyed us, she said bitterly. We could have recovered from a bad demo. We can't recover from our lead investor walking out and questioning our management team. Marcus didn't destroy you. He just pointed out what was already broken. You were planning to take $8 million from investors while treating your lead engineer as someone who couldn't be trusted in the room. That was going to fail eventually. It just failed faster because Marcus recognized it. You could fix this, she said quietly. If you stayed, if you led the technical side publicly, if investors knew you were committed, we could salvage the round. At what cost? Staying in a company where I've just been publicly humiliated? Where my VP tried to take credit for my work and failed so badly that our lead investor walked out. That's not a foundation for building anything. She had no response to that. We both knew the truth. The damage was done, and my staying would only delay the inevitable failure that came from fundamental misalignment about whose contributions mattered. My phone rang Friday evening, 3 days after the failed demo. Marcus Webb, calling from a number I'd deleted but still recognized. I owe you a conversation, he said. Can we meet? We met at a bar near his office, the kind of place where venture capitalists and founders negotiated deals over expensive whiskey. 2 years since we'd last spoken, and the dynamic between us was still complicated. Former partners who'd built something together, then dissolved the partnership in ways that left questions unresolved. I didn't mean to blow up your funding round, Marcus said, but I couldn't sit there and watch what was happening. What did you think was happening? I thought David was taking credit for your work and pushing you out of the conversation. I thought Sarah was letting it happen because she didn't understand the implications. And I thought that if I invested in Nexus under those conditions, I'd be funding a disaster that would cost me money and cost you your career's best work. You walked out because you thought I'd leave. I walked out because I knew you'd leave. Because I know you well enough to recognize when you were being disrespected, and I saw your face when David cut you off. You were going to quit, if not that day, then soon. And Nexus without you is a platform without the person who understands how it works. That's not an investment, that's a liability. I sipped my drink, processing the implications. You destroyed their funding round to protect me? I destroyed their funding round to protect my capital. You leaving was predictable. I just pointed out the prediction before. They'd taken my money. If anything, I did them a favor. Better to face reality now than 6 months into a Series A when you're gone, and they're trying to figure out why the platform isn't developing the way they promised. David thinks you sabotaged them because of our history. David thinks a lot of things that aren't true. He thinks he can take credit for other people's work. He thinks investors don't notice when the person who built something isn't allowed to explain it. He thinks politics matter more than competence. Marcus paused. He's wrong about all of that, and Nexus will fail because of it. Sarah tried to convince me to stay. Sarah is a good CEO in most ways, but she made a bad bet on David, hired him because she thought Nexus needed professional product management, didn't realize that professional product management doesn't mean sidelining the technical talent. By the time she figured it out, the dynamic was already broken. I thought about the past 18 months, about the platform I'd built, the vision I'd had for it, the features that would never be developed now because I was walking away. What happens to Nexus? I asked. They'll try to raise money from other investors. Maybe they succeed, maybe they don't. If they do, they'll struggle to replace you, struggle to maintain what you built, eventually realize that technical platforms aren't transferable assets. They're inseparable from the people who created them. If they don't raise money, they run out of runway in a few months and shut down. All that work, gone, not gone, transformed. The platform you built doesn't disappear just because Nexus does. The knowledge you gained, the architecture you designed, the problems you solved, all of that comes with you to whatever you do next. What if I don't know what I want to do next? Marcus smiled. Then let me tell you what I think you should do. Build it again, the platform you designed for Nexus, but without the baggage of investors who don't understand it and VPs who want to take credit for it. Build it as your own company, with your own vision, with control over how it gets presented and developed. That's easy to say when you're not the one taking the risk. Which is why Summit Capital would lead your seed round. $2 million, same valuation terms we were offering Nexus, but invested in a company where the founder is the technical talent rather than someone managing the technical talent. I stared at him. You want to fund me to build a competitor to Nexus? I want to fund you to build what Nexus should have been. What it would have been if David hadn't tried to take credit for your work and Sarah hadn't let him. The platform is good, Adrian. It deserves better leadership than what it had. We haven't spoken in 2 years. Our partnership ended badly. Why would you want to work together again? Because I learned something from how our partnership ended. I learned that I didn't value your technical contributions enough, didn't give you enough credit for what you built. Let business considerations override technical judgment. The same mistakes Nexus just made, but less dramatically. He paused. I'm offering you a chance to build something where that doesn't happen, where your contributions are recognized, where you have control, where no one cuts you off mid-demo because they're threatened by how much more you know than they do. I thought about the demo that had collapsed, about 7 minutes of presentation before being silenced, about the 18 months of work that felt like it was slipping away. I need time to think, I said. Take whatever time you need. But Adrian, don't let what happened with Nexus convince you that the platform wasn't good. It is. It just needs the right structure to thrive. The next 6 weeks were a careful exercise in parallel processing. I documented everything for Nexus, wrote technical specifications, recorded video walkthroughs, created diagrams that explained architectural decisions. The kind of handoff documentation that was probably useless without me there to explain the context, but which satisfied the legal requirements of my departure. And I started designing the next version. Not a copy of Nexus's platform. I was careful about intellectual property, about what belonged to them and what belonged to me. But the core insights, the architectural patterns, the solutions to problems that weren't owned by any company, because they lived in my understanding of how enterprise systems work. Marcus was right about one thing. The knowledge came with me. Nexus might own the code I'd written for them, but they didn't own my ability to write better code, to design better architecture, to solve the same problems in ways that were cleaner and more elegant. I incorporated Apex Systems in October, 6 weeks after the failed demo. Marcus's fund led the seed round, $2 million at a $5 million valuation. Terms that gave me control, that recognized my technical contributions as the core asset, that protected against the kind of dynamic that had destroyed my relationship with Nexus. The first months were terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. Building something from nothing, without the structure of an existing company, without colleagues to share the burden. Just me, a vision, and the knowledge that I'd done this before and could do it better this time. The office was a small space in a shared workspace. Nothing like the polished environment Nexus had occupied, but functional and affordable. I spent the first month architecting the new platform, making decisions that I'd second-guessed at Nexus, implementing patterns I'd learned from experience. This time, I built it right. Not fast, not expedient, but correct. The kind of architecture that could scale, that could be maintained by other engineers, that wouldn't accumulate the technical debt that comes from rushing to meet arbitrary deadlines. I hired carefully. 3 engineers who understood that technical excellence mattered, who weren't interested in taking credit for work they hadn't done. My first hire was Jennifer Park, a back-end engineer I'd worked with briefly at a previous company. Smart, detail-oriented, comfortable with ambiguity, but insistent on clarity where it mattered. "Why should I join a seed-stage startup instead of staying at my comfortable job?" she asked during her interview. "Because you'll build things that matter, with people who recognize your contributions. Because you won't have to navigate politics or watch less competent people get promoted over you. Because the code you write will be yours in a way that it can never be at a large company." That's the idealistic answer. What's the realistic answer? The realistic answer is that we might fail, but if we do, you'll have built something you're proud of, learned things you couldn't learn anywhere else, and you'll be able to point to architecture decisions you made rather than meetings you attended. And if we succeed, you'll have equity that's actually worth something, because the company will be built on technical excellence rather than on someone's ability to take credit for other people's work. She joined. So did 2 others, Michael Chen, a front-end specialist with a gift for making complex systems feel simple, and Sandra Rodriguez, a DevOps engineer who understood that infrastructure was as important as application code, a business development lead who understood that her job was to sell what we built, not to redefine what building meant. Her name was Rachel Morrison, and she'd spent 10 years in enterprise sales for larger software companies. She understood the difference between selling technical capabilities and taking credit for technical work. "My job is to find people who have problems we can solve," she said during our first strategy session. "Your job is to solve those problems in ways that are elegant and maintainable. I'll never pretend I built what you're building. I'll never cut you off mid-demo because I'm uncomfortable with how much more you know. That's not sales. That's insecurity." A structure that valued competence over politics, results over narrative control. By month 6, we had a working prototype, not the same as Nexus's platform, but recognizably descended from the same architectural insights. Better in some ways, because I'd learned from Nexus's mistakes. Cleaner code, more maintainable architecture, features designed with 2 years of additional perspective on what enterprise clients actually needed. The integration layer was more elegant. I'd figured out how to reduce the complexity without sacrificing capability. The caching strategy was more sophisticated. 3 years of experience had taught me where the bottlenecks really were. The security model was tighter. I'd learned from incidents at Nexus that had revealed vulnerabilities in my original design. By month 12, we'd signed our first 3 customers, small companies, pilot programs, the kind of early traction that validates a concept without proving sustainability. But it was real revenue, real customers choosing our platform because it solved real problems. And then, in month 14, something unexpected happened. Sarah Chen called, not to offer congratulations or to catch up, to ask whether Apex Systems would be interested in acquiring Nexus's technology and customer base. "We're shutting down," she said simply. "David left 3 months ago, after we couldn't raise the Series A. I've been trying to keep things going with remaining seed money, but we're out of runway. The platform you built still works, we still have 1 paying customer, but I don't have the technical expertise to maintain it or develop it further." What happened with the funding? Every investor we talked to asked about you, asked why you left, whether we could replace you, what our technical roadmap looked like without the person who designed the platform. We didn't have good answers. Karen and Robert eventually passed. So did everyone else. "I'm sorry," I said and meant it. "I know how hard you worked. Not as hard as you did. I'm realizing that now. Too late, but better than never. The The platform was always yours. David and I were just managing something we didn't build and didn't fully understand. When you left, we lost the thing that actually mattered. What are you asking for? A fair price for the existing customer contract, the code base, the brand assets, a chance to say that Nexus became something successful, even if not in the way we originally intended, and maybe a recognition that you were right. About everything. I thought about 18 months of work, about the demo that had collapsed, about David cutting me off mid-sentence and Marcus walking out because he understood what that meant. I'll buy the customer contract, I said, and I'll hire any engineers who want to join Apex, but I don't want the code base or the brand. The platform I'm building is better than what I built for Nexus, and I don't need the association with how that ended. That's fair, more than fair. She paused. Can I ask you something? Did Marcus really walk out because he thought you'd leave, or was there something else? Ask Marcus, but I think he walked out because he recognized a pattern he'd seen before, a company that didn't value its technical talent until it was too late. He was just honest about what that meant. Nexus officially shut down in November, 19 months after that failed demo. The customer we acquired integrated smoothly into Apex's platform. Ironic that the same code I'd written was now being maintained by me under a different company name. 3 of Nexus's engineers joined Apex, grateful for the continuity and the chance to keep working on something they had invested in. David Reeves disappeared from the industry for a while, then resurfaced at a different startup in a reduced role. I heard through the network that he'd learned something from the experience, become less aggressive about claiming credit, more willing to let technical talent speak for themselves. Maybe the failed demo had taught him something. Maybe it hadn't. Either way, it wasn't my problem anymore. Marcus and I rebuilt our working relationship slowly, carefully, with the lessons of our previous partnership, informing how we interacted. He stayed on Apex's board, but gave me space to lead, trusted my technical judgment, never cut me off mid-explanation because he was uncomfortable with how much I knew. The partnership worked because we'd both learned what happens when it doesn't. 2 years after leaving Nexus, Apex Systems had grown to 20 employees and $5 million in annual revenue. The platform I'd built twice actually, once for a company that didn't value it and once for myself, was being used by mid-size enterprises who appreciated the technical elegance that came from being designed by someone who understood their problems deeply. I think about that demo sometimes, about 7 minutes of presentation before being interrupted, about David's attempt to control the narrative and Marcus's decision to walk out rather than fund a disaster, about how a single meeting revealed dynamics that had been building for months, crystallizing them into a moment where choices had to be made. They say you should never burn bridges, but sometimes the bridge burns itself, collapsing under the weight of disrespect and credit-taking and the fundamental dishonesty of letting someone claim work they didn't do. The VP cut me mid-demo. The lead investor was my former partner, and he saw what was happening, saw it clearly enough to walk out, to withdraw his support, to force a reckoning that should have come months earlier. And in the wreckage of that collapsed demo, I found something better than what I'd been building. Found the freedom to create without someone taking credit for it. Found investors who understood that technical platforms live or die with the people who build them. Found the clarity that comes from having your value questioned and proving definitively what that value actually was. The VP cut me mid-demo, 7 minutes, and everything changed. Turned out those 7 minutes were exactly what I needed.